How would you motivate and inspire 28 men under your command? Cut off from civilization with limited supplies and no hope of rescue when your boat is crushed in ice? Could you brave the worst seas on the planet in a 20-foot launch? To find help for the men you left on a barren icy rock? Who depend on your survival for theirs? Would you bring every man back alive? This is the remarkable story and legacy of Ernest Shackleton's leadership, and the legacy of the men who desperately fought to survive. On February 15, 1874, Ernest Shackleton was born in Kilkea, Ireland. Somewhat directionless during his childhood, Shackleton found his destiny on the sea, and his passion in Antarctic expeditions in the early 1900s. Exploration of the South was popular during Shackleton's time. Antarctica had not been explored much, and explorers were anxious to discover the new continent. Many daring expeditions occurred, and the mysterious continent was full of adventures. Other great leaders, such as Robert Falcon Scott, Edgeworth David, and Roald Amundsen, led expeditions to the South Pole that would forever embody Antarctic exploration. In 1902, Shackleton joined the crew of the Discovery led by Sir Robert Falcon Scott. Nearly reaching the South Pole, the bitter cold exhausted Shackleton, and the other men on the crew did not reach the South Pole. However, Shackleton learned that reaching the pole would be harder than he thought. Once back in Europe, Shackleton saw himself as being in high demand for his published articles of the Discovery and his newly achieved experience in Antarctic adventure. In 1905, Shackleton studied politics and became a shareholder in speculative companies. However, Shackleton was making it no secret of his love for the Antarctic and his longing to return on another expedition in the future. Weeks later, Norwegian explorers led by Roald Amundsen reached the South Pole, changing Shackleton's goals. Shackleton would now aim to cross the entire continent of Antarctica. In 1913, Shackleton began to form a plan for the Trans-Antarctic expedition, a journey which would attempt to cross the entire continent of Antarctica and would be a first for exploration at that time. Despite the recent breakout of World War I, the British government and Winston Churchill himself gave Shackleton and his acquired crew permission to travel to the Antarctic. Later in 1913, Shackleton had the ideal ship created for the expedition, designed to break through pack ice and built by a master shipbuilder in Norway. The ship was originally known as Polaris, but Shackleton later named the ship Endurance, inspired from his family motto, "By endurance we conquer." On September 27th, Ernest Shackleton and his crew departed from London and set sail across the Atlantic Ocean to Buenos Aires, Argentina. From this city, the crew would sail to the island of South Georgia, Chile. From South Georgia, the ships traveled southward to the body of Antarctica, sailing through pack ice. After a short time, the ice started to get thicker and freezing at a faster rate. Shackleton decided to take another approach and travel north along the peninsula. Then, on January 15th, 1915, the Endurance became frozen, stuck in pack ice. Slowly, the ice caved in tighter into the ship. Carpenter Harry McNish described the ship the night before it was beset, making sounds like a dying animal or person. After a few days, much water started to pour on the ship. Shackleton gave his men the order to abandon the ship. On January 21st, 1915, the Endurance gave way and burst to splinters. Shackleton believed that his men had no need to lose hope, though. There was a whaling port and storage cache on Paulette Island, approximately 250 miles away. The men gathered as many supplies from the wrecked ship as they could, saving canned food, clothing, and any other necessities they would need to survive. Shackleton decided it would be most beneficial to walk on the ice for as long as possible. He gathered the crew before beginning the march and told them that they could only bring necessities. As an ample sign of sacrifice to his men, Shackleton threw down his own gold antique pocket watch into the snow. He also tossed the ship's only copy of the Bible into the ice, a true sign to his men that they could and will survive. Shackleton set out along with 4 other men to accompany him. He refused to pack any more than 4 weeks' worth of supplies, knowing it would diminish his crew's positivity towards survival. Shackleton and the James Caird set off on April 24th, 1916. After 15 days at sea, on May 8th, the island of South Georgia was visible, and they moved onwards towards the island. To this day, one of the crew members, Frank Worsley, is given much credit to their navigation towards that island. When they reached the rocky shore, a horrible discovery was made. Miles of mountainous terrain blocked their path to safety. Shackleton wanted him and his small group to try and go overland now, to get to the whaling station. Shackleton took 2 of his men to join him and cross 32 miles of mountainous terrain, while leaving the other 3 men to stay with the James Caird boat and wait for them. The trip alone would be 36 hours long for Shackleton and his men to cross the mountains with him. On May 20th, Shackleton reached the whaling station at Stromness port. While at the port, Shackleton appealed to the Chilean government, asking if he could use the aid of one of their small Navy supply ships. It was approved, and Shackleton immediately sent out ships and rescue plans for the 3 men with the James Caird and the rest of his crew stuck on Elephant Island. Considering all they had been through, not one person on the Endurance had died. The united crew of the Endurance cheerfully sailed back to Europe. They had truly endured. Upon return, World War I was in full swing. Shackleton resumed his lectures on Antarctic discovery and added his account of the Endurance expedition to his lectures. For his lecture and past military supports and fundings, he was named an officer of the Order of the British Empire. In 1920, growing quite tired, Shackleton considered doing one last expedition. After a few months of gaining finances, Shackleton got the approved to go to Antarctica again. He needed a seaworthy crew, and though not many of his former crew members on the Endurance ever received payment, they were volunteered to go on one last expedition with their boss. After setting sail and heading southwards, they reached the Antarctic. Shackleton was reported to have multiple back pains and chest pains, but he wished to keep going. As he neared the area known as South Georgia, which is where they had been during the Endurance expedition, tragedy struck. At 2:50 a.m. on January 5th, 1922, Shackleton suffered a fatal heart attack. On March 5th, Shackleton was buried in South Georgia. Over time, as the rest of his crew from the Endurance expedition passed away, their ashes have been laid next to their leader's grave. After the Endurance was crushed, the men in Patience Camp faced a dilemma. For a few weeks, the crew survived on food salvaged from the wreck, but as time progressed, shortages grew. Groups of men would daily search the vast landscape for seals or penguins. Shackleton refused to stockpile food. This would cast a negative outlook towards the survival of the crew. He believed if the men were to stockpile, they would feel like they were preparing for the worst. However, the crew also had 70 flooding dogs to feed. The men had grown very fond of the dogs, but many dogs consumed more food than some of the men. This was a problem. Slowly, over a period of 8 months, the crew had to kill the dogs, providing food for themselves in order to survive. They only killed the dogs when they most needed, following Shackleton's brilliant ideal not to stockpile food. The boss would often inspire the men with group speeches and offer encouragement to everyone. In Shackleton's private journal, he would often express his feelings towards survival and the hope for his crew. He could still be emotionally askew at times, but would block those negative feelings and show his men an optimistic and hopeful man. Shackleton often reminded the men of why they were trying to survive. For many of these men, their inspiration were their families back home, that they hoped to see once again. Shackleton was very different than most leaders in the early 1900s. He treated officers and sailors equally. He believed that the crew would grow stronger and work together better. Everyone on the crew, even officers, participated in necessary duties around the ship. This mingling formed a bond between the men that helped them to survive, and he gave them friends and memories that they would never forget.
Well, Shackleton's legacy is without doubt his leadership in every aspect. You know, his timeless leadership. I mean, 100 years from now, people will still be, people like you will still be doing projects on it. People will be writing books about it. I mean, it is timeless. It will continue forever.
It has been 101 years since the Endurance expedition occurred. Shackleton's legacy has spread and increased in ways he could have never imagined. Hundreds of books and documentaries have been created, marveling at his leadership. Even conventions and leadership schools are dedicated to understanding his leadership style during his expeditions. Many accounts of the Endurance expedition exist. Frank Hurley took many photographs of the expedition, and every single man on the crew was required to keep a journal and update it regularly. Some journals were published, such as Ernest Shackleton's and Frank Worsley's. Shackleton's leadership, more than his explorations, is his legacy. His nickname was often Boss, but in the end, he became more than a leader and a mentor. Shackleton was family to his crew. It was in these ways that his outstanding leadership and legacy will live on, not only through stories of the past, but through the minds of those who want to be leaders in the future, and those who intend to leave a legacy for others to follow.